Germany was reconsidering whether it would participate in the 2026 FIFA World Cup. Not canceling, not withdrawing, just reconsidering. And in the world of international football, with a tournament less than 2 months from kickoff, reconsidering is its own kind of earthquake. You have to understand what it means for a nation like Germany to even allow that word into the conversation. These are not countries that treat World Cup participation as optional. These are footballing powers for whom the tournament is a fixture on the national calendar. A given, a certainty so deep, it never gets questioned. And yet, here was the German Football Association using language that felt controlled but deliberate. Language that carried real institutional weight, rather than the noise of fringe politicians or frustrated supporters. The German politician Jürgen Hart, a member of the Christian Democratic Union, had already floated the idea of a boycott publicly, and calls from across the United Kingdom had been growing louder, with voices in England and Scotland raising similar questions about whether participation should be automatic, given everything surrounding the United States as a host nation. What had started as a private conversation was becoming something else entirely, and the moment it became something else, it stopped being just about football. FIFA had constructed the 2026 World Cup around a financial vision that is genuinely staggering in scale, projected revenues exceeding $11 billion, driven by an expanded 48-team format, 104 matches spread across stadiums in the United States, Canada, and Mexico. This is the most commercially ambitious World Cup ever assembled. The numbers are not just projections. They are the foundation of agreements already signed, deals already locked in, broadcast rights already sold to networks that paid billions under specific assumptions. Chief among those assumptions was this, that Europe's biggest nations would show up, compete, and deliver the global audience that makes everything else work. Because Germany, France, England, Spain, and Italy are not just competitive teams. They are commercial engines. They are the reason broadcast rights in parts of Africa, Asia, and across Europe cost what they cost. Germany alone has historically delivered domestic television audiences, exceeding 20 million viewers per match, with tens of millions more watching internationally. That is not a footnote. That is the infrastructure of the entire financial model. When you build $11 billion around the presence of certain teams, and one of those teams begins treating its presence as something open to debate, the entire architecture starts to vibrate in ways that are difficult to contain. The timing is the part that makes this particularly acute. As of April 2026, the tournament is scheduled to begin on June 11th and conclude on July 19th. That window leaves almost no margin for structural adjustment. Every sponsor activation, every broadcaster schedule, every logistical plan around venues, transport, accommodation, all of it has been built on the assumption that the biggest teams are coming and bringing their audiences with them. There is no version of the event that quietly absorbs the absence of a major European nation without visible financial and reputational damage. And the people running FIFA know this, which is why the public stance from the organization continues to emphasize neutrality and the traditional separation of sport from politics, a position that FIFA President Gianni Infantino has repeated consistently. But the reality behind that stance is considerably more complicated than the language used to describe it. What is actually happening is that national federations are beginning to evaluate participation through lenses that go beyond competitive strategy, political climate, travel policy, unpredictability, diplomatic tensions between their governments in Washington. And when those factors enter the calculation, FIFA's ability to maintain clean lines between football and geopolitics becomes increasingly difficult to defend because the concerns being raised are not abstract. They are connected to real and documented situations. Legal and policy analysts, including voices like Mark Path, have publicly raised concerns about the unpredictability of travel enforcement in the United States, flagging genuine uncertainty around who can enter under what conditions, and whether those conditions might change between now and the tournament. These are not hypothetical scenarios. Countries, including Iran, Haiti, Senegal, and Ivory Coast, have already experienced shifting visa and travel policies that created real access problems for their citizens. And those examples are being cited in the conversations happening inside football right now. This matters because the World Cup is not just about the teams on the pitch. FIFA itself estimates that millions of international visitors are expected to travel across North America during the tournament, generating billions in tourism revenue and creating the atmosphere that global sponsors pay to be associated with. If there is a credible perception, not even a certainty, just a credible perception that access to the United States is inconsistent or politically influenced, that changes the behavior of fans, sponsors, and broadcasters in ways that compound across the entire event. Attendance projections soften, advertiser confidence wavers. The energy of the tournament, that intangible thing that makes the World Cup, begins to feel uncertain in a way it never should this close to kickoff. The European response has been carefully calibrated to avoid firm commitments while acknowledging the underlying sensitivity. Countries like Denmark, France, and the Netherlands have not issued definitive statements, but the tone across those conversations has been notably cautious. In the Netherlands alone, reports indicate that more than 100,000 supporters have signed petitions calling for a boycott. Not just officials or politicians, but fans who are the lifeblood of the tournament's atmosphere and a significant portion of the economic activity that surrounds it. That is a number too large to dismiss as noise. Denmark's situation adds a specific geopolitical dimension, given the ongoing broader political discussions involving Greenland, which have drawn Danish interests into a complicated relationship with the United States, at exactly the moment when that relationship should be defined by football cooperation. One voice that added notable credibility to the discussion was that of Seth Blatter. His comments in early 2026, expressing support for the idea of a fan boycott of the United States, carried a kind of weight that purely political voices cannot generate in this space. Blatter no longer holds formal authority within FIFA. His tenure ran from 1998 to 2015, but his understanding of how the organization operates and what pressure points matter means his words land differently inside football circles than they would coming from a government minister. When someone who helped build the modern World Cup commercial model begins endorsing the idea that fans should stay away, it is not something FIFA can simply absorb without responding. While all of this is unfolding in Europe, Canada and Mexico are quietly doing something interesting. Both countries have positioned themselves as stable, reliable, and drama-free presences within the three-nation hosting structure without ever directly inserting themselves into the political tension surrounding the United States. Canada, under Mark Carney's leadership, has leaned into messaging around consistency, rule of law, and institutional predictability, qualities that have become genuinely valuable to European nations looking for reassurance. Mexico, drawing on its experience hosting World Cups in 1970 and 1986, has emphasized operational readiness and the depth of its football culture. Neither country is making noise. Both countries are making points. The subtext of this quiet positioning is not lost on anyone inside the sport. It raises, at least theoretically, the question of whether matches assigned to U.S. venues could be redistributed within the broader North American framework if circumstances required it. The logistical, contractual, and political challenges involved in any such reallocation would be enormous. Stadium agreements, transport infrastructure, sponsor commitments to specific cities and venues, all of it would need to be unraveled and reconstructed under enormous time pressure. But the fact that the conversation can even exist at this stage, rather than being immediately dismissed as fantasy, tells you something about how much the baseline certainty surrounding this tournament has shifted. For the corporate partners who have committed hundreds of millions of dollars to sponsorship deals structured around maximum global visibility, this uncertainty introduces a variable that their initial calculations did not account for. Advertising rates for marquee World Cup matches are set based on projected viewership that depends on specific teams being present and competitive. If even one major European nation is absent, those projections shift. And when projections shift, the conversations that follow involve renegotiations, activation changes, and revenue adjustments that ripple outward from FIFA through every layer of the commercial ecosystem built around this tournament. The expanded 48-team format adds complexity rather than absorbing it. More matches create more opportunities for revenue generation, but they also create more pressure points in the system, more moments where disruption, reduced attendance, or muted broadcast audiences can accumulate into something that materially affects the final numbers. FIFA sold this format as a feature. In the current environment, it functions partly as additional exposure to risk. What Germany has done without making a definitive announcement is something arguably more significant than a straightforward withdrawal would have been. It has introduced visible uncertainty into a system that depends on certainty. It has made participation look like a decision rather than a default. And once that framing takes hold, it doesn't let go. Other nations watch, other federations recalibrate, other sponsors quietly flag the contingency in internal planning documents. The precedent being set is not just about 2026. It is about the relationship between governing bodies and participating nations going forward, and about whether FIFA's model of treating the World Cup as an institution above political disruption is sustainable in the current global environment. The historical reference point most often cited is the 1980 Moscow Olympics, when a US-led boycott involving dozens of nations demonstrated how comprehensively participation can become a vehicle for political expression, and how lasting the damage to an event's perceived legitimacy can be when that happens. The situations are not identical. The political dynamics are different, the scale is different, and the economic architecture is far more complex in 2026 than it was in 1980. But the basic mechanism is recognizable. Nations using presence or absence at a global sporting event to send a message that other channels cannot deliver as visibly. What the United States is now navigating is a test of something more fundamental than stadium readiness or logistical execution. The infrastructure is there, the venues are prepared, The planning has been underway for years. What is being questioned is the confidence of international partners, teams, federations, broadcasters, fans, sponsors, in the stability and openness of the environment in which the tournament will take place. That is a harder thing to demonstrate than a completed stadium, and the window to demonstrate it is narrowing with every week that passes. The 2026 World Cup will almost certainly happen. The preparations are too far advanced, the financial commitments too deep, and the institutional momentum too strong for the event to collapse. But the story around it has changed in a way that cannot be walked back. Because once a major footballing nation makes withdrawal feel like a real possibility, that possibility becomes part of the conversation permanently, not just for this tournament, but for every discussion about how future events are structured, where they are hosted, and what leverage participating nations actually hold. The question that hangs over everything now is not whether the matches will be played. They will. The question is whether this tournament will be remembered as the moment when the assumed permanence of global football's political neutrality began to crack, and what that means for the sport's ability to operate as a unified global institution in a world that is becoming less and less inclined to set politics aside for the sake of a game. Germany didn't cancel anything. It just made cancellation thinkable. And in doing so, it changed the conversation in a way that even a definitive withdrawal might not have managed, because a withdrawal ends the discussion. An open question keeps it alive. And right now, that open question is sitting at the center of everything happening in global football, with the clock running and very few clean answers in sight.